Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into over 3,000 years of incredibly complex, deeply contested, and honestly, absolutely fascinating history. We're going to explore exactly how the modern state of Israel and the wider Middle East came to be. This is a land that has literally witnessed the rise and fall of powerful kingdoms, the birth of major world religions, and some truly incredible modern achievements. So let's just dive right in.
To make sense of all these millennia of history, we've broken things down into 6 distinct eras for this explainer. First, the ancient kingdoms of Israel. Second, conquests and shifting empires. Third, Zionism and the British Mandate. Fourth, the Holocaust and the State of Israel. Fifth, decades of war and peace. And finally, modern Israel today.
Chapter 1. Ancient Kingdoms of Israel and Their Foundations in Canaan. We're starting way back at the very ancient roots of this region, originally known as Canaan, where archaeological evidence actually shows human habitation going back a staggering 10,000 years.
So, according to biblical tradition, the story kicks off around 2000 BCE when Abraham traveled to Canaan. Fast forward a bit, and his descendants eventually moved to Egypt during a famine, which led to the Exodus, where Moses led the Israelites out of enslavement. By 1000 BCE, King David united the tribes and established Jerusalem as his capital, where his son Solomon built the first temple, which became the absolute center of Jewish worship.
But you know, that unity? It didn't last very long. After Solomon died, the United Kingdom fractured right down the middle. The Kingdom of Israel formed up in the north, and the Kingdom of Judah formed in the south. And this internal division created an immense vulnerability to outside forces.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, Conquests and Shifting Empires. Because this region physically connects continents, it was highly coveted. We now enter a completely dizzying era of foreign conquest, where the land is constantly changing hands.
Looking at this, you can see how rapidly empires shifted. First, in 722 BCE, the Assyrians conquered the north. Then, in 586 BCE, the Babylonians captured Jerusalem and actually destroyed the first temple. But the pendulum swung back when the Persians took over, allowing the Jewish people to return and build the second temple. Following Alexander the Great's Greek rule and a really brief period of independence won by Jewish rebels known as the Maccabees, the mighty Roman Empire took control in 63 BCE.
Under Roman rule, things were incredibly volatile. You had Herod the Great expanding Jerusalem, and of course, this is exactly when Jesus of Nazareth preached and Christianity began to spread. But for the Jewish population, it was a time of massive upheaval. Following a revolt in 70 CE, the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, and by 135 CE, after yet another rebellion, many Jews were expelled entirely, and the Romans went ahead and renamed the province Syria Palestina.
Over the following centuries, control just kept shifting through Byzantine, Islamic, Crusader, and Ottoman periods. In fact, in 1099, European Crusaders captured Jerusalem, only for the Muslim leader Saladin to retake it less than a century later in 1187. Through all of this, Jerusalem's religious significance layered immensely. It's the site of the ancient Jewish temples, it's where Jesus was crucified, and in 638 CE, it became home to the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. These ancient structures sit right on top of the exact same sacred ground. Understanding that overlap is absolutely crucial to grasping why this land is so deeply valued today.
Chapter 3. Zionism and the British Mandate. Okay, let's fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. After about 400 years of relative stability under Ottoman Empire rule, shifting global politics began to rapidly alter the landscape all over again.
Driven by severe persecution in Europe, a movement called Zionism really started to take hold. Basically, this was a political movement advocating for a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel. This sparked a massive wave of Jewish immigration back to Ottoman-controlled Palestine. But at the exact same time, it led to growing tensions with the local Arab population who opposed that influx.
Then, World War I happens. Britain defeats the Ottomans and takes control of the region. In 1917, they issue what's known as the Balfour Declaration, which made a very tricky dual promise. It expressed British support for a Jewish national home, but concurrently stated that the rights of existing non-Jewish communities shouldn't be harmed. Attempting to balance those two competing interests drastically escalated violence throughout the 1920s and 30s.
Chapter 4, Holocaust and the State of Israel. This brings us to one of the most horrific tragedies in human history, which ultimately acted as a major geopolitical catalyst for the modern Middle East.
During World War II, Nazi Germany murdered approximately 6 million Jews in the Holocaust.
It's just a staggering, heartbreaking number. The sheer shock and horror of this atrocity directly strengthened international support for creating a safe Jewish state.
And that international support materialized quickly. The United Nations stepped in, proposing a partition plan in 1947 to essentially divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. This paved the way for May 14, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion officially declared the independence of the State of Israel.
But as you can imagine, the UN partition plan was deeply divisive. Jewish leaders accepted the plan to split the land, but many Arab leaders outright rejected it. In fact, the very day after Israel declared independence, neighboring Arab countries invaded, triggering the 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
The outcome of that 1948 war profoundly reshaped the region's demographics. Israel survived and actually expanded its borders well beyond the initial UN allocation. But the human cost? It was massive on multiple fronts. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians became refugees during the conflict, an event Palestinians refer to as the Nakba. Concurrently, in the years following, many Jews fled or were completely expelled from several Arab countries. It was this massive, complex displacement of people that still heavily impacts the region today.
Chapter 5. Decades of War and Peace. The latter half of the 20th century was essentially defined by intense military conflicts that redrew borders all over again, followed by some incredibly groundbreaking, albeit challenging, peace agreements.
A hugely pivotal moment here is the 1967 Six-Day War. In literally just under a week of fighting against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, Israel captured East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. These monumental territorial changes completely reshaped regional politics in ways that are still heavily contested right now.
The conflict definitely continued, notably with the surprise attack of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. But interestingly enough, the shock of that war actually helped push the region toward diplomacy. By 1979, Israel and Egypt signed a historic peace treaty, and Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan followed up with their own treaty in 1994, and during the 1990s, the Oslo Accords created limited Palestinian self-government, though a final, lasting peace agreement has remained completely elusive.
Chapter 6. Modern Israel Today. Let's look at where things stand right now, examining the complex duality of a nation that is both a global powerhouse of innovation and a country deeply entangled in historical conflict.
On the one hand, today's Israel is just an economic powerhouse. I mean, it's globally recognized for a booming economy, leading the way in sectors like advanced technology, cybersecurity, medical research, and some really highly efficient agricultural techniques. It's a modern nation that has cultivated immense innovation within its borders.
But, on the other hand, those foundational disputes remain entirely unresolved. Huge issues over borders, security, settlements, the right of return for refugees, and of course, the ultimate status of Jerusalem, these continue to spark complex international debates and tragic periodic violence that heavily affects both Israelis and Palestinians.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. You see, understanding Israel's past is really the only way we can even begin to explain the political and cultural developments shaping the Middle East today. We've just seen how ancient stones literally dictate modern borders. So it leaves us wondering, with over 3,000 years of deeply contested history, how exactly will the ongoing story of this immensely significant region unfold in the future? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this dive into history helpful, keep seeking out the facts, keep exploring those sources, and we'll see you next time.